head engineer was, a guy called James Lockery. And I said, James, this is killing me. These guys are, you know, singing in various different keys on one part. He said, well, you're not using Melodyne down there. I was like, what's that then? He's like, come here, come here. So he pulled a chair up and he showed me, and I was like, what? My name's Laurence Allen, aka Laurence Woo Allen, or Mr. Woo, as I'm known in my areas of music. We're in my very humble studio in Bedford, United Kingdom. In about '91, I decided to take my chance and go to LA, and wound up on the East Coast in New Jersey, and it all basically started from there. Got my first remix from a British guy who owned a label in New York City called G Street Records, and that was with PM Dawn. I started doing records for the Gravediggers, which was some underground who went on to be the Wu-Tang Clan, Jungle Brothers. I done a pop R&B record for a group called B2K. The first part one was done by a guy called Tricky Stewart, who was responsible for Umbrella with Jay-Z. From there I started rolling. I'd met with another white rapper at that time who was signed to Capitol Records by way of Naughty by Nature, called Miilkbone. At that time Eminem had evolved onto the scene. He had basically done a diss record towards all the white guys at that time, and a friend of mine asked me would I be up for doing a response back to Eminem for Deathrow Records for Suge Knight. And I guess at that time Dr. Dre had left the label, and yeah, I said, why not, let's do it. Again, was, you know, pretty crazy and caused a lot of attention. From there I got a bit fed up with the States, and had kind of been there and done that, and it had been around 12 years since I knew what was going on in the UK. I decided to come back. I started working with the groups of that time, you know, your typical groups like Liberty X and Terry Walker and Big Brothers, and done a few records with them. I've just done a record recently with one of Madonna's backing dancers called Nicole, who flew in from New York. And I also did a country album. I know it's quite diverse, but I think you have to be these days. And I've got a young girl from Sheffield flying out to Nashville to hopefully get a deal from it. Coming back, went into Russia and produced maybe 4 or 5 albums over a couple of year period for a bunch of Russian artists, from actresses to singers that are quite well known out there. In fact, we went out there with Craig David and done a collabo with a young lady called Slava. And it was great to work with Craig. He's an absolute professional. I mentioned earlier that I'd went into Russia, and a lot of the acts came over to the UK, and we was working out of Van Morrison's studio in Bath. And I think with the language barrier of some of the Russian artists, they were focusing on the language and not the actual singing and the performance. And some of the girls were singing a verse in 2 or 3 different keys. It was a bit frustrating, and I'd actually gone upstairs where the head engineer was, a guy called James Lockery. And I said, James, this is killing me. These guys are, you know, singing in various different keys on one part. He said, well, you're not using Melodyne down there. I was like, what's that then? He's like, come here, come here. So he pulled a chair up and he showed me, and I was like, what? And I said, but when you're pushing the vocals around, you're not losing any of the artifact of the vocal. He was like, no, it's completely natural. You'd never know any different. I was like, wow. And I purchased a copy. It was a small, I think it was Essential or Uno or one of them. And it completely took hours and hours and hours of workload off of my day. I use Melodyne in many different ways, on many different sessions. I'll give you a good example. I had my guitarist Martin Drabik in, who forgot his guitar. He used one of mine, and we got a lovely take, perfect. But the problem was, when I heard it back, what he'd done, he'd pulled back on the neck of the guitar, and there was an overtone kind of, when it went flat slightly, the overtones were going flat. And I was like, oh wow, we've got this great take. I don't want to edit it because it's obviously going to cut off. So I put it in Melodyne, and there they were, the overtones. So I was able to go in and actually physically take harmonies and move them where they needed to be because he bent that neck back. Vocals, if an artist can't quite hit a pitch, let's put it up there for them. And you know, the beauty with that is once you correct something, I don't even know if you should use the word correct. Once you kind of apply something in Melodyne, the artist can then go in and sing it the way they're hearing it back, and it ups their game because they're not having to sing it from their head where they think it sounds right. They can actually relate back to it and hear it back. Oh, that's me. Oh, that's how I'm singing. And they can get it then. They can hit them notes because they can practice with their own voice. DNA is brand new to me. And what a revelation. And only by accident did I realize what it actually did. I was, I think, working on a vocal, and I decided from a desktop to drag something in. I wasn't using it as a plugin at the time. And I actually dragged in by accident a stereo track. And suddenly this whole thing became splattered the screen. And I was like, what the? So I hit play, and there's my stereo track playing. And I was like, oh, hold on a minute. I was actually able to go in on the stereo track and start playing around with it. So from there, I thought, well, what does that do to drums? And, you know, there's always a stigma when people play around with an 808 kick. My thing is you've got to have the kick in tune with the key of the song, right? The other beauty is when you import any audio into Melodyne, it intelligently tells you what key is, and you can snap to the grid. So that's telling me, it's tuning all my parts to the key of the song, including drums and 808s and everything else. So again, took me into a whole nother area. I'd say Melodyne has changed, has pioneered where we are right now in certainly urban music. Hip hop music has come forward. You're getting rappers like Kanye West, Jay-Z, Puff Daddy, P. Diddy singing now on tracks as well as rapping. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, they weren't doing that. And it's because of mediums like Melodyne, you're able to transform yourself as a rapper. So you're rapping, and then the chorus comes in and you're singing. And it's through stuff like Melodyne that it's transformed, it's pioneered, evolved where we are now in urban music. Because most of these guys can't sing, they're not great singers, but with the help of tools like Melodyne, it's put them into a whole new arena. Bye.